Hi, Dennis Rosas, President of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, California Properties, and I'm having a few moments of business communication with a wonderful man, our Tim Rush. Tim is special to us, and he's going to share a special message about a gentleman by the name of Roger Dawson.
Well, Roger and I met when I was 19 years old in Toastmasters in a club in Bellflower, and so Roger and I met serendipitously there in Toastmasters. I was a newly minted vault teller across the street at Bank of the West, which soon became Lloyd's Bank. And I got invited by a buddy of mine who worked at the branch. We had gone to high school together. Anyway, he dropped out of Toastmasters. I hung in and liked it and thrived at it. And Roger and I became good friends. And really, it was the beginning of a lifelong friendship, a 48-year journey. Roger was a good friend, and he was a mentor of mine. He was a boss of mine. I wound up coming to work for him here at what was then Bruce Mulhern Inc. Realtor in June of 1977. But I joined Toastmasters in 74. So that period prior to that, I was going to college at night and had several different sales jobs and wound up selling a program called the Time Bank to Bruce as a result of an introduction by Roger. And I remember first meeting Bruce, I was so nervous I was about to jump out of my skin because there was such an aura even then about Bruce Mulhern. I remember thinking, my goodness, he's so much younger than everybody thought he was, because of course the logo of the company in those days was the elderly gentleman with the British tea strainer mustache, the monocle, and the top hat. So everyone assumed, even everybody at the bank, that, well, Mr. Mulhern must be an elderly gentleman. Well, of course, he was anything but that. But anyway, back to Roger. So Roger was a retail executive with Montgomery Wards and had been transferred a number of times, and in the course of doing that, wound up owning about a dozen houses. Because every time they'd transfer him, it would be on a moment's notice, and he would rent the house, go to a new town, buy another house, and he sort of created a modest little real estate empire by the time he and Bruce became acquainted. Well, he was working on a sales training motivational program with a fellow by the name of Roger Manton, who was then the West Coast sales manager for Airstream Travel Trailers, which in those days had a plant in Cerritos, long gone, but Roger Manton was also a very, very dynamic speaker. I would say even more so than Roger Dawson. But unfortunately, Roger Manton never chose to develop his skill set. Roger did. Roger took to Toastmasters like a duck to water, and he acquired all of the designations you could get in Toastmasters. And anyway, Roger wound up getting referred by one of the Toastmaster members to Bruce Mulhern to present his program. Well, Bruce did present the program. Roger presented the program. Bruce was so impressed, he wound up offering Roger a job and hired him away. So Roger was working here in Bellflower for about a month, and in those days there was a lady by the name of Joan DePlarkelis who was a manager in the Covina office, and she and Bruce got into some beef, and she left and took many of the salespeople with her. And so Roger then got transplanted to the Covina office, and sometime thereafter he drug me along. After I had sold the Time Bank program to the company, was our company, Seb Sturpa's company, and I think it was Ray Dilbeck and Bob Stevenson company. We had a joint managers training over in Catalina. So on the boat, on the big white steamship coming back from Catalina, why Bruce and Roger, of course, made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I did initially refuse it. They threatened to throw me overboard.
I had a feeling that was coming, Jim.
Yeah. So we can make this easy, or we can make it hard. It's up to you. So do you want to be chum for the...
You want to be captain of your ship, or do you want to be thrown overboard?
Yeah, you want to be fodder for the propeller. So anyway, So that's how I wound up coming to work for Roger and Bruce. But Roger and I remained, even though I was his subordinate, I reported to him, but I learned a lot from Roger. I was only 19 when my father died, and my mother, I was 21 when my dad died, 19 when my mother died. So Roger really helped me mature as a person, and individually, personally, and then professionally. So he was a huge help to me. I learned so much from him. And he was president of our company. First he was vice president and general manager. Then he became president. He was president for about 3 or 4 years. He rode a tumultuous wave with the company because when I started with the company in '77, we had 8 offices. Well, at our peak, we went all the way to 34 offices. Well, then interest rates went skyrocketing to 18.5% on first and 25% on seconds. You remember those days?
Yes, I do.
And so today, with rates at nearing 6% and people crying, while rates are higher than they were, they're hardly historic highs. So everything's relative. But anyway, so of course we closed offices and the market went through a rather severe adjustment. And so Roger left in March of '83 to become a professional speaker, platform speaker. And his first book, first book I should say that was really not self-published, was published by Prentice Hall, and it was called You Can Get Anything You Want, But You Have to Do More Than Ask. He rewrote the book and renamed it Power Negotiating, Secrets of Power Negotiating, which was just re-released just about 10 months ago. And so it's been on the business bestseller list for years. So Roger's, what started out as cassette tapes, then became CDs, have been a perennial top 10 bestseller with Nightingale Conant. He had the pleasure of getting to know Earl Nightingale and many people. So Roger got inducted into the National Speakers Association Hall of Fame, and I know he was considered at one time for a Golden Gavel Award from Toastmasters International, and certainly maybe posthumously they'll do that. But anyway, Roger had 3 children, and he traveled around the world 7 times before he settled in California. And he was a ship's photographer. He had graduated from the Regent Street School of Photography in London, England, and where he was educated, born in London. And his father was a cabbie. Now, that sounds like a pretty modest job here in the U.S., but in London, that's a job that has great distinction, because there you go through pretty rigorous testing in order to be appointed with your own black cab in London. You have to know every nook and cranny of that entire environment.
Mind if I ever look for another job?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So anyway, Roger he had a great wit, great sense of humor. There's one of the many funny stories, but when he was, I'm not sure if he was president, I think he was vice president, general manager at that point. On a Monday morning, why, of course, Bruce as usual, and in those days got in about 5:30 in the morning, even earlier than he did in later years, but when he would come in at 7. But so he'd been working away. Roger comes in at, 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So, and I was here. Bruce called Roger into his office. And so as Roger told the story, and Bruce concurred with this version, that Bruce proceeded to share with Roger how frustrated he was that he got here at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Why couldn't Roger get here at least by 7:30 in the morning? And that he should be working as hard as Bruce is, and so forth. And so Bruce got finished with his, as Roger described it, a double veiner.
Mm-hmm.
And
we know those, yes.
So
you know more than I do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I even experienced triple veiners. Yeah, though that was the ultimate. Yeah. Anyway, so Roger retorted to Bruce, he said, Bruce, you know, you are an incredible business person. Look at all your accomplishments. I really worship you. You've done so much. You've done so many great things. And I could never begin to barely hold the hem of your robe. You're very bright and so forth. Bruce said, damn it, Roger, I don't need you to compliment me. I just want you to get here at 7 o'clock in the morning. Roger said, Bruce, I'd do anything for you. Why, I'd even wear a dress to work. And Bruce went on again, I just want you to get here at 7 o'clock in the morning. And Roger very dryly retorted, Bruce, I was really holding out for the dress. Of course, with that, Bruce couldn't help but laugh. But Roger had just a tremendous sense of humor. And of course, that's what made him a great speaker as well. So he employed every tool that he learned in Toastmasters: gestures, vocabulary, his elocution, his diction, his presentation skills, using his organizational patterns that were developed by Toastmasters. All of that, every single thing he put to work and marshaled that into his speaking career. I remember Bruce was initially skeptical as to whether or not he would make it, but Roger did. And Roger, of course, spoke on negotiating, persuasion, and decision making, and developed all three of those into separate programs. There were years he did well over 100 presentations a year, traveling all over, mostly North America. Sometimes he went to Europe, he went to Australia, New Zealand. And for a number of years, especially towards the end of his career, he spent a lot of time going to China, which is almost laughable. It's like, why would we be going to China to teach them how to negotiate? But nonetheless, Roger was there doing that, teaching. I mean, in some cases, he'd have 500 or 800 people in a room, and they would be 2- and 3-day seminars. Because of the language difference. He had a translator, so what here would be a 1-day seminar, there would be 2 or 3 days. So, but they would meet him at the airport with a chauffeur-driven limousine and flowers, and you'd think he was a British rock star. So he really was treated quite well and paid very well over in China. I remember him telling a story of his promoter over there. One day Roger happened to mention, gee, I'd like to get maybe a new suit and some sport coats. And he said, oh, okay. He said, well, I'll have someone a tailor at your room at 6 o'clock tonight. So the tailor shows up, took all of his measurements. Much to Roger's surprise, the fellow was back 24 hours later with 2 suits and a sport coat.
Wow.
All of his measurements with his name embroidered on the inside. And it was just remarkable. I mean, to think you could get that kind of service in 24 hours. But he traveled the world. He went bungee jumping. He climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, went to the first base camp of Mount Everest. Of course, he climbed all the peaks in California. And he was very much an adventurous person. He lived life to the fullest.
You shared quite a bit, Tim. He impacted your life on a business and personal level.
Well, he sure did. And we don't all get the benefit of having a mentor like that, but Roger was an incredible mentor for me. And I encourage each of you to seek out someone in your life who will do as much for you as Roger did for me and for many others. And he was not just a great communicator, but he was a fabulous person individually. And it's a great loss. The world was a better place with Roger in it, and it's a little bit maudlin because he's not with us today. So he leaves a great legacy of leadership and communication and instruction. And the 17 books that he wrote are certainly a part of his legacy of what he chose to teach. You know, he got started on the subject of negotiation because he observed how much business was being lost by our agents because of poor negotiating skills. So he developed a curriculum to teach them how to improve that. And like everything, of course, we didn't have universal adoption, but the agents were much more successful as a result of the techniques that he developed and taught them. So anyway, so there you go.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for sharing some of the wisdom and business value and personal value of Roger Dawson. He will be missed. He was close with Bruce and, of course, as Tim. And to all those in our company, build your legacy for you and your family. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you,
Have a great day.
Dennis.
Appreciate your sharing this morning.
Thank you.